June 1941. German panzer formations crossed into Soviet territory in what became the largest invasion ever launched, shattering Red Army defenses with disciplined, methodical force. Panzer crews reported back confidently over the radio. Soviet tanks were obsolete, slow, and easily destroyed. Simple targets for German guns. Intelligence summaries reinforced what German engineers already assumed. Soviet industry was crude, outdated, and at least a generation behind the Reich's technological strength. Then the tone of the reports shifted. A Panzer III commander near Raseiniai, Lithuania, pressed his radio transmitter with trembling hands. His voice was unsteady as he described what had just unfolded. A single Soviet tank, green, angular, unfamiliar, had appeared on the road ahead. His gunner fired. The shell struck the sharply sloped front armor and deflected harmlessly into the trees. The Soviet tank did not slow. It fired once. The Panzer III beside him detonated in a fireball. Its turret hurled into the air. The commander watched in disbelief as the Soviet tank drove straight through a German anti-tank gun position, crushing the guns beneath its tracks. Shells struck its armor and bounced away like pebbles. Within 2 weeks of the invasion, similar messages poured into German headquarters from every sector of the front. An unknown Soviet tank was tearing through German armor, almost without resistance. It moved faster than German panzers. Its gun destroyed German tanks at distances where German weapons could not penetrate it. Its armor absorbed hits that should have been fatal. Crews from the most professional armored force in the world were being destroyed by a machine intelligence had dismissed as the product of Soviet backwardness. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare, read the reports in his headquarters and felt something he had not experienced since 1918: doubt. The Panzer Force had been built on the assumption of German technical dominance. Now commanders were reporting an enemy vehicle that surpassed everything Germany possessed. He demanded answers. He demanded a captured example. By late July 1941, outside Minsk, a Soviet T-34 sat disabled in a field, its left track destroyed by a lucky hit to the drive wheel. The crew had abandoned it during the night. German infantry approached cautiously, expecting an ambush. The tank was empty. Word traveled upward immediately. Within hours, a recovery team arrived with direct orders. The tank was to be sent to Germany, no matter the cost. It was loaded onto a rail car, concealed beneath tarpaulins, and transported west under armed guard. The train moved through Poland into Germany, carrying a secret that would force a complete rethinking of the war. At Kummersdorf, the proving ground south of Berlin, engineers from the Waffenprüfamt awaited its arrival. These men had designed the Panzer III and IV. They understood armor, engines, and guns better than almost anyone alive. They were told to expect something unusual. They believed they were ready. They were not. The chief engineer, a man named Werner, who had spent more than 2 decades designing military vehicles, circled the T-34 3 full times before saying a word. The tank stood in the testing hall beneath harsh electric lights, still coated in Russian mud, still carrying the scent of diesel fuel and burnt cordite. Werner placed his hand on the sharply sloped frontal armor. He measured the angle once, then again, 60 degrees from vertical. He paused, recalculated, and checked a third time. "This should not function," he said quietly. His assistants looked up. Werner pointed at the glacis plate. "The armor here is only 45 millimeters thick. Our Panzer III has 50 millimeters. He ran the numbers mentally, then wrote them down to confirm. "But at this angle, the effective thickness is close to 80 millimeters against our guns at normal combat ranges." A younger engineer, Klaus, knelt to measure the tracks, 500 millimeters wide, nearly double the width of German tank tracks. He looked up. "Ground pressure." Werner consulted the weight data. 26.5 tons. He calculated quickly. The T-34 exerted far less pressure on the ground than any German tank. It could cross mud, snow, and soft terrain where German panzers routinely became stuck. "These tracks aren't excess," Klaus said. "They're deliberate." Werner nodded. The Soviets had solved a problem German engineers had barely acknowledged: the terrain of the Eastern Front itself. They opened the engine compartment. The sharp odor of diesel filled the air. Werner froze, then checked his notes to be sure he was reading them correctly. Every German tank used gasoline. Gasoline engines were powerful and refined, but dangerously flammable. The Soviets had installed a diesel engine, a V-12 producing 500 horsepower. 500, Werner said under his breath. A Panzer III has 300. He looked again. This tank weighs less than a Panzer IV, yet has nearly twice the power. He studied the captured fuel system documentation. Diesel was far less likely to ignite even when the tank was penetrated. Survivability increased immediately. Klaus examined the cooling system. "The engine is mounted transversely. Look at this layout. It's rough, but it's clever. Everything is accessible." He ran his hand along the mounting points. "You could remove the entire power unit in a field workshop." Werner frowned. "Our tanks require factory facilities for major engine work. A crew with basic tools could service this." They moved to the gun. The 76.2 mm F-34 dominated the turret interior. Werner examined the breech recoil system and ammunition racks. He lifted a captured armor-piercing shell. It was heavier, longer, and more solid than German equivalents. He checked the translated specifications. Muzzle. Velocity exceeded 700 meters per second. Penetration approached 90 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. "Our long 50 millimeter gun," Werner said, "manages 60 at that range." He looked at Klaus. "This weapon belongs to a heavier class, and they mounted it on a medium tank. A medium tank that moved faster than German designs. A medium tank with better armor. A medium tank that cost less to build. They spent 3 days analyzing every system. The transmission was crude, difficult to operate, and prone to failure. Vision devices were poor. The turret was cramped and uncomfortable. Radios were primitive, or entirely absent. None of it changed the conclusion." Klaus compiled the final findings and read them aloud in Werner's office. Superior protection through sloped armor. Superior mobility through wide tracks and high engine power. Superior firepower through a larger gun. Manufacturing cost approximately half that of the Panzer IV. Production time roughly 2/3. Werner sat in silence. Outside, workers assembled Panzer IVs, the pride of German engineering. Inside, 2 engineers faced undeniable proof that the Soviets had built a better tank. Not perfect, but better in the ways that decided battles. Werner finally spoke. "We understood sloped armor," he said. "We have understood it for years." He gestured toward the T-34 schematics spread across the table. "We chose not to adopt it because it complicates internal layouts, reduces usable space, and makes manufacturing more difficult." He tapped the documents. They accepted those compromises, and they made it work. Klaus studied the latest battlefield reports arriving from the front: more destroyed German tanks, more crews describing shells ricocheting off Soviet armor. "What do we tell them?" he asked quietly. Werner reached for the telephone connecting directly to Berlin. "The truth," he said. "We are facing a tank superior to anything we currently field, and intelligence suggests they are producing them in vast numbers." The report reached Hitler's headquarters in early August 1941. The Führer rejected it outright. Soviet technology was inferior. This was accepted fact. early victories had proven it. The engineers, he believed, were being defeatist, imagining problems where none existed. The report was set aside, and the advance eastward continued. But the engineers were correct. At Kummersdorf, Werner's team continued firing tests. German anti-tank guns were aimed at the captured T-34 from multiple distances and angles. The 37mm gun equipping early Panzer III's failed to penetrate the T-34's frontal armor at any practical range. The short-barreled 75mm gun of the Panzer IV could penetrate only at very close distances, and only if it struck a flat surface. Later Panzer III models, equipped with longer 50mm guns, could penetrate under 500 meters, sometimes, depending entirely on angle. Werner underlined his notes sharply. This is unacceptable. This is not how technological superiority is supposed to perform. They then tested the T-34's gun against captured German tanks. The results were devastating. The 76mm shells pierced Panzer III armor effortlessly. Panzer IV frontal armor was penetrated at ranges exceeding 1 kilometer. The tanks that had conquered Poland and France were now obsolete, 6 weeks into the campaign. Werner summoned representatives from Germany's major tank manufacturers. Engineers arrived from Porsche, Henschel, and MAN. The T-34 was positioned at the center of the proving ground. The visitors walked around it in near silence. "Gentlemen," Werner said, "this is what we are facing. Not in limited numbers. Soviet production capacity is enormous. Intelligence estimates tens of thousands of these vehicles." A Porsche engineer, Friedrich, studied the armor slopes. "We can incorporate sloping into our designs." "Yes," Werner replied, "but it demands complete redesign. New hulls, new turrets, new factories." "How long?" Friedrich asked. 2 years, he calculated. "Perhaps 3. "We don't have 2 years, Klaus said, holding up the latest casualty summaries. "We are losing tanks now, losing crews now, and each month more T-34s leave Soviet factories." The discussion continued for 6 hours. Every option was debated, every timeline calculated. The conclusion was unavoidable. Germany required entirely new tanks, not upgrades of existing ones. The Panther program was born that autumn. German engineers adopted the T-34's sloped armor concept and refined it. They added superior optics, better ergonomics, and stronger guns. The Panther would eventually surpass the T-34 in firepower, but it would not appear until 1943. 2 years of fighting with inferior machines. 2 years of losses that could not be replaced. The Tiger program, already underway, was accelerated. If German tanks could not match Soviet armor through slope, they would do so through sheer thickness. The Tiger's frontal armor exceeded 100 millimeters. Its 88mm gun could destroy any Soviet tank at any range. But Tigers were expensive and complex. Germany would build fewer than 2,000. The Soviets would build more than 60,000 T-34s. Werner traveled to the Eastern Front in October 1941. He needed to observe the T-34 in actual combat to confirm that the proving ground data matched battlefield reality. He accompanied a panzer company operating near Moscow, watching from an observation position as dawn broke. 3 T-34s appeared along a ridgeline, dark shapes against the rising sun. The German company commander issued the fire order. 6 panzer tanks fired almost simultaneously. Werner followed the tracers through his binoculars. 5 shells struck the Soviet tanks. 1 T-34 absorbed 3 direct hits to its frontal armor. All ricocheted. Bright sparks flashed in the morning light. The T-34s did not withdraw. They advanced. The German commander's voice over the radio remained calm, but urgent. Close the distance. Close range. Aim for the turret front. The Panzer IVs surged forward, engines straining. attempting to reduce the range before the Soviet tanks could fire. They failed. The T-34s opened fire. 2 Panzer IVs exploded instantly, ammunition detonating violently and sending thick columns of smoke skyward. A 3rd Panzer took a hit to the turret that tore it apart, killing the crew outright. The remaining vehicles attempted to retreat, deploying smoke grenades to disengage. One did not escape. A T-34 shell struck its side armor, penetrating cleanly and turning the tank into a burning wreck. Werner watched as the Soviet tanks rolled past the destroyed German vehicles, continuing toward German positions. They appeared unstoppable. For this company, they were. The commander sat in his vehicle afterward, his head lowered. 4 tanks, he said quietly. 4 tanks in 3 minutes, and we didn't damage a single one. He looked at Werner. You're the engineer. Tell me how we fight them. Werner hesitated. Attack the sides. Target the rear. Disable the tracks with high explosive rounds. Then maneuver for a side shot. He paused. Or wait for better tanks. When? The commander asked. 2 years, Werner replied. The commander laughed, bitter and exhausted. 2 years. We'll all be dead by then. He was not wrong. That company would be destroyed and reconstituted 3 times before the Panther entered service. Most of the men Werner met that morning would never see the tanks the T-34 forced Germany to build. Back at Kummersdorf, Werner wrote his final evaluation. After months of study, testing, and battlefield observation, his conclusion was unavoidable. The T-34 represents the most significant advance in armored vehicle design since the invention of the tank. It combined sufficient armor, sufficient firepower, and sufficient mobility in a form that could be mass-produced by relatively unskilled labor. It was not flawless. Vision systems were poor. The transmission was crude. Crew comfort was minimal. But it was effective. And effectiveness, Werner wrote, is the only metric that matters in war. German tank design, he concluded, had emphasized refinement over practicality. Precision engineering, crew comfort, and mechanical reliability were admirable, but meaningless when faced with superior armor and superior guns. The T-34 proved that crude but effective defeated sophisticated but inadequate. His recommendations were severe. Germany must immediately shift to tanks with sloped armor and guns capable of penetrating 80 millimeters of armor at combat ranges. This would require abandoning existing production lines and accepting a temporary shortage. The alternative was continuing to build tanks that could not survive. That option, he wrote, was unsustainable. The report reached the High Command. They read it. They understood its implications. Orders were issued to push the Panther and Tiger programs with maximum urgency. At the same time, continued production of Panzer IIIs, Canter IIIs, and IVs was authorized. Germany needed tanks immediately, even inadequate ones, because the Eastern Front was consuming armored vehicles faster than factories could replace them. Klaus found Werner late one evening in his office, standing silently at the window. Outside, the captured T-34 sat on the testing ground under floodlights, surrounded by measuring equipment and German tanks positioned for comparison. Even motionless, even captured, it looked threatening. "They're going to keep building Panzer IVs," Klaus said, "even though we know they aren't enough." Werner nodded. "They have no alternative. The Panther won't be ready before 1943 at best. The front requires tanks now, so crews will be sent out in vehicles we know are inadequate. They will die, and we will write reports explaining why." He turned away from the window. "We are engineers. We solve technical problems, but we cannot solve the problem of time." The Soviets had completed this tank in 1940. Germany encountered it in 1941, and would not field a true response until 1943. Could we have built something like this? Klaus asked. Werner considered carefully. Technically, yes. We had the metallurgy, the knowledge, the industry. He gestured toward the T-34, but we didn't, because we assumed Soviet technology was inferior, because we valued sophistication over effectiveness, because we believed we already knew better. He picked up a section of sloped armor removed for metallurgical testing. The welds were rough, the finish was poor. By German standards, it was unacceptable, but it stopped German shells. That was enough, Werner said. The Soviets had understood something Germany had not. In war, adequate and available beats, perfect and delayed. The T-34 at Kummersdorf became a lesson. Every German tank designer who visited studied it closely. Armor angles were measured, suspension systems examined, transmissions analyzed despite their crudeness. The gun was test-fired repeatedly. The tank that had shocked German engineers became the foundation for their response. When the Panther finally entered service in 1943, the influence was obvious: sloped armor, wide tracks, and a powerful gun capable of defeating Soviet armor. The lesson had been learned, but too late. Werner retired in 1944, his health broken by exhaustion and strain. He had spent years attempting to close the gap revealed by the T-34, trying to give German crews machines that could survive. The Panther was effective. The Tiger was fearsome. Neither arrived in sufficient numbers to alter the outcome of the war. Years later, after the conflict ended, Werner was interviewed by a military historian. Asked about his first encounter with the T-34, the old engineer paused. "We opened the engine compartment," he said, "and when we saw the diesel engine, we knew. Immediately." He swallowed. The Soviets had built something we could not match, at least not with our existing designs. He reflected on the intelligence reports that had dismissed Soviet industry as primitive, on the assumptions of superiority that had gone unchallenged. "We were wrong," he said softly. "Dangerously wrong." The T-34 was not perfect. It was crude in many respects, but it worked. And in war, Werner concluded, what works is what matters. The historian asked one final question. What did he think the first time he stood before the captured tank? Werner smiled faintly. "I thought, we are in serious trouble." He was right. The T-34 examined at Kummersdorf still exists today, preserved in a Russian museum. The measurements, tests, and reports remain in German archives. They record the moment when confidence met reality, when assumptions collapsed under battlefield evidence. The T-34 forced Germany to redesign its entire armored doctrine. It influenced every tank that followed. It demonstrated that simple, practical solutions could defeat refined but inadequate systems. And it taught a lesson repeated in every war since. Never assume your enemy is inferior. Never assume you already have all the answers. And never underestimate the power of effectiveness over elegance.